Ange Postecoglou finished the 2024-25 European season by doing something that many big names before him couldn't do at Tottenham Hotspur and winning the Europa League over the highly touted Ruben Amorim's Manchester United. Unfortunately for Big Ange though, that wasn't enough to save his blushes from a Premier League campaign where Spurs lost a whopping 22 of 38 games and finished just one spot outside the relegation zone, all the way down in 17th. That 17th place Premier League finish ultimately outweighed ending Spurs' 17-year trophy drought in the Europa League final, and Ange was sacked by Daniel Levy, being replaced by Thomas Frank from Brentford. Despite that sacking at Spurs, Ange still has a very good record at club level, winning at Celtic in Scotland, Yokohama F. Marinos in Japan, and the Brisbane Roar back in his homeland of Australia. Well, today it's time for us to try and start rebuilding Ange's managerial career on Football Manager 2024 as we act as his DOF throughout the remainder of his career and try and lead him to Champions League glory. Starting things off on the 3rd of July and game off the back of his sacking at Spurs, with an updated database that includes Thomas Frank at Spurs, as well as all teams in the right leagues and players at the new clubs. There is some initial interest in Ange, despite the fact the game has no record of his time at Spurs or that big Europa League win. That interest though comes from Al Ittihad over in Saudi Arabia, a club that while predicted to do well and with some big names on their books like Karim Benzema as well as N'Golo Kante, isn't the right fit for Big Ange to get back in the managerial merry-go-round. No other clubs are interested in Ange who are managerless come the start of the 2025-26 season, so it's time to sim forward and see what will pop up for Big Ange during the course of the first half of the European season. There was no more interest in Ange for the next 5 months as he spent his time in South Melbourne overlooking St Kilda Beach and drinking copious amounts of wine and keeping many local sports clubs afloat by devouring their sausage sizzles at Bunnings Warehouse. But just as Ange's tan was starting to get a little bit too red, he did start to get some phone calls from Europe at the start of December. Serie A came calling first, with Ange being tempted by AC Milan in Italy, finding themselves down in 8th spot in the league despite a pre-season prediction of finishing 2nd. Also on the blow to Ange was Freiburg from the Bundesliga. This would provide Ange a chance to go back-to-back in the Europa League, but he wasn't keen seeing as they found themselves bottom of the Bundesliga and were only predicted to finish in 7th. In the end, the club that took Ange's interest the most was Eintracht Frankfurt, also in the Bundesliga. They found themselves in the Champions League, but were struggling in the Bundesliga, sitting in 13th off the back of a pre-season prediction of 5th. Ange saw potential in Eintracht Frankfurt with some good experienced heads like Mario Götze, Kevin Trapp, and Robin Koch, alongside a number of highly promising youngsters like Hugo Larsson, Paxton Aronson, Kanazun, and Jean-Matteo Bahoya. So while they weren't doing as well league-wise as AC Milan, only sitting 4 points clear of the relegation zone, Ange made the big call and decided to drag me along to Eintracht Frankfurt. So here we are at the first club of rebuilding Ange, and it's Eintracht Frankfurt here in the Bundesliga. They are struggling sitting 13th, but to be fair, they are supposed to be one of the better teams here in this division, expected to finish in 5th. So hopefully, with the help of me as the DOF as well as Ange in charge going with you'd imagine, once we find him here on the staff page, his 4-2-3-1, they should be able to improve. You'd imagine this will be a bit of an upgrade on who they had here previously. Let's just check, in fact, who that was. It was Dino Topmoller, who did get sacked after 146 days in charge. Let's just see what he looks like. You'd imagine that Ange might be a little bit better there than the former assistant manager of both Bayern Munich as well as RB Leipzig. And to be fair, this is a quite strong looking team that we do have here at Eintracht Frankfurt. Even before we do get stuck into the transfer window, you can see there's a number of quite high potential players. Aurelio Menda, who is a centre-back, no doubt he will be getting some decent game time here under Ange, but to be fair, a few players that might be in front of him, and the likes of Robin Koch. Left back, we've got a promising player here, that's Nathaniel Brown, only 2.5-star current ability. That's a good 2 Bundesliga players, so to be fair, that might be an area where we do need to improve him, but 5-star potential, he could end up being quite handy. So maybe that's someone that Ange will hopefully give a good run to here during the course of this first season, going down a bit further and getting into midfield. A couple here of really high potential players, in particular Hugo Larsson. Hopefully Ange will play him quite a bit because he looks very good already at 19 years old and has decent potential too. So this actually looks like a pretty good landing spot here for Ange for his first job off the back of that second from Spurs. Going down a bit further, Mario Götze is a very experienced head and definitely someone that Ange can count on in that central attacking midfield position. But as well as that, you've got the likes of Jean-Matteo Bahoya, who might be the biggest wonder kid here at Eintracht Frankfurt. He has that 5-star potential, albeit one of those stars it is white, but already a good Bundesliga player and very natural up front and behind the striker, and also at left wing. And to be fair, it doesn't look like there's a lot of natural left wingers in this Eintracht Frankfurt team. Ali Wahi can do a job there, but you dare say he is probably the most likely replacement as that striker for Hugo Ekitike when he departed for Liverpool. So I think both those players will currently sit in Ange's team once we do convert it to the 4-2-3-1 that he does use. So we'll see how this Eintracht Frankfurt team it does get on before we make our way into the January transfer window. And thankfully, we do have a couple of games where we can see exactly what Ange is going to do. We've got 4 games here with Eintracht Frankfurt, 3 in the Bundesliga, starting off, of course, with Freiburg, one of the teams that was interested in Ange. They sit bottom, so really, if he can't beat those guys, we might need to actually start this rebuild from all the way back in Australia in the A-League, because seriously, that should be a gimme. Also got Mainz, who are struggling as well, and RB Leipzig away, that could be a bit more tricky, but they're not exactly doing well either. So a couple of quite winnable games in the Bundesliga, and also we've got the final group stage game of the Champions League, because this is FM24 and we're still technically in game in 2023-24. We are still stuck in the good old group phase, and Ange needs to pick up a win here to make sure that they'll be able to make their way through into the Champions League knockouts. To be fair, it could still be a crack at dropping down to the Europa League. Of course, with this old format, it does mean that finishing third in your group, it should still be enough to drop down to the Europa League. And to be fair, Eintracht Frankfurt could be quite dangerous in that competition, but hopefully Ange can find a way there to pick up a result and just make sure that maybe they can overtake Inter or Arsenal. To be fair, that is quite a tough group that Eintracht Frankfurt have had. To be fair, they did beat Arsenal away and Inter at home, but somehow they lost to Gavina Vezda at home. They did get better by Inter away, and also got held by Gavina Vezda there away from home too, so not too good a work there from the previous manager against, you'd say, the minnow team out of Serbia from this group. So hopefully Ange can find a way to at least make sure these guys do qualify for the Europa League. We'll get a chance to see exactly where he rocks with here with his 4-2-3-1. Ange does like using a 4-2-3-1, but not too sure quite yet what roles he does like to use. So we'll see what he's going to do here in his first 4 games in charge, and from there should have a bit more of a plan in terms of what we need to improve in the January transfer window, where we do have quite a big budget. No doubt some of that Ekitike money has still been left over. It's just under 50 million with a spare wage budget of 110k, so definitely some room for us here to improve the squad and back Ange in a way that Daniel Levy never really did at Tottenham Hotspur. So hopefully Ange can get off to a good start here in those first 4 games at Eintracht Frankfurt, and we'll come back with some good transfers off the back of the winter break. Ange's first test of the season was away at a bottom place Freiburg, where he definitely was expecting a win, and thankfully that's what he picked up, with Feliz Chibi chipping him with goals at the 59th and the 69th minute. A nice start for Ange in his time at Eintracht Frankfurt. Then came the crucial final Champions League group stage game where they took on Arsenal and Frankfurt, and thankfully Ange's team got off to a good start here with a goal to Christensen just past the 10-minute mark. From there, just before half-time, the promising John Mateo Bahoya made his way forward down the left-hand side and buried one into the bottom right-hand corner to give Frankfurt a 2-0 lead at half-time. Off the back of the half, Arsenal came out strongly, with Bukayo Saka putting through Martin Odegaard and Victor Gotthard putting one away for Arsenal to make things close, but in the end, Frankfurt held on for a 2-1 win, which made sure that they'd finish top of their group based on head-to-head record and be going through to the round of 16 in the Champions League. Ange continued his unbeaten streak at Frankfurt going into the winter break as he backed up those wins over Freiburg and Arsenal with a 4-1 Bundesliga home win over Mainz and a goal from second-choice right-back Aurelio Buta to pick up a huge 3 points away at the Red Bull Arena. So off the back of those 4 wins to start his time at Eintracht Frankfurt, Ange got his team all the way up inside a European qualifying spot, sitting 5th, only 2 points outside a Champions League spot occupied by Borussia Dortmund. And that 2-1 win over Arsenal in their final Champions League group stage game meant that they get Chelsea in the Champions League round of 16. Ange's first choice 11 usually looked like this, with Kevin Trapp in goal as a sweeper keeper on defend. In front of that, it was 2 inverted wingbacks out wide, with Christensen at right back and the promising Nathaniel Brown at left back, with Robin Koch and Hrvoje Smojic pairing up in central defence. The double pivot in front of that had Alius Skuri in the defensive midfield role and Hugo Larsson as a segundo volante. As expected at left wing, it was the promising Jean Mateo Bahoya who occupied the left side as an inside forward, with the exact same role out right for Japanese international Ritsu Don. Mario Götze sat behind the striker as an advanced playmaker, with Ali Wahi having filled the boots of Hugo Ekitike well with 11 goals in the first half of the season. The transfer budget had been bumped up to 61 million off the back of the early sale of Michy Batshuayi to Al Shabab for 4.5 million. with Eric Jr. Dina Abimbe also wanting to depart the club, being transfer listed at $6 million. It looked like Ange could use an improvement in terms of a backup goalkeeper, with there being a big drop off between Kevin Trapp and Jens Grau, and both those goalkeepers being over 30 years old. The other big area of concern was left wing, as while there are a few options there that could do the job in Aliuahi and Jean-Mateo Bahoya, neither of them were natural in that position. We filled the goalkeeping gap with the addition of Matteo Carnesi from Atlanta for a fee of $20 million, a much younger option than Kevin Trapp with better attributes, trying to encourage Ange to give him the first choice jersey by demoting Kevin Trapp to being just a cup goalkeeper. We spent nearly double that fee though on a new first choice left winger and Andreas Schelder from Benfica. He looks a lot more natural than Jean-Mateo Bahoya in that role, especially as an inside forward. And off the back of the departure of Eric Jr. Dina Abimbe for $5.5 million to Wolverhampton, we were also able to bring in a promising winger out of Russia in Sergei Pinyaev. Schelder made an immediate impact as he scored the opener in our 2-1 home win over Hamburg in our first game off the back of the winter break, before Ange inexcusably changed things up as we took Stuttgart on away from home in a big 4th versus 5th clash, which we unfortunately suffered defeat in 2-0. Off the back of that first defeat, we made one more transfer move before the window closed, with Aurelio Buda making his way to Lazio for a fee of $4 million, replacing him with the more promising Miguel Maga out of Vitória Guimarães in Portugal for $5.5 million. And thankfully Ange found his way back into winning form as we beat a struggling Bayer Leverkusen 3-1 at home, albeit it came at a massive cost as the highly promising Jean-Mateo Bahoya broke his foot and would be out for 2 to 3 months. Those results have meant that Eintracht Frankfurt still set in 5th, largely thanks to their first defeat to the 4th place Stuttgart. Andreas Schelder continued his great start to life at Frankfurt, picking up a double and a 2-0 win over Heidenheim, before a couple of tactical changes didn't pay off away from home and a 1-0 defeat at a struggling St. Pauli. Ange went back to a more familiar tactic though as they needed to bounce back immediately, with the first leg of their round of 16 Champions League clash against Chelsea, and Aliuahi got them underway off the back of a shot coming off the woodwork. Unfortunately, off the back of that though, Cole Palmer got into gear and picked up a double to give Chelsea a 2-1 half-time lead. And Ange's men weren't able to turn things around in the second half, as with only 7 minutes to go in this first leg, it was Jamie Bino Giddens who'd set up Christopher Nkunku to put it away and give Chelsea a 2-goal advantage heading to Frankfurt. Ange's men were able to respond to those back-to-back defeats in the Bundesliga, beating Cologne 4-1 at home, before 2-0 away wins against Wolfsburg and Augsburg, leading into the crucial second leg of their round of 16 Champions League tie against Chelsea. Unfortunately, Ange's men were still asleep early, giving the ball away, which allowed Jamie Bino Giddens to make his way through and give them a 3-goal lead early in the second leg. Just before half-time though, Frankfurt strike back, with Robin Koch rising like a salmon and getting them back into the tie. Unfortunately though, a few minutes later Chelsea grabbed their 3-goal lead back. Romeo Lavia started to make his way forward down the right hand side and Trapp parried away into Enzo, who completed a simple tap-in. And off the back of half-time things only got worse as Jamie Bino Giddens got the ball off the back of Caicedo going down and picked up a double to give Chelsea a 4-goal lead. Frankfurt tried to get their way back into the game with 15 minutes to go, with Mohamed Dahoud scoring before an Andreas Schelder penalty, but unfortunately it was far too little too late, only made worse when Chelsea made it 4-3 on the day with 10 minutes to go, with Liam Delap putting one away into the bottom right corner. So just like that, Ange was out of the Champions League in the round of 16, but he had got them firmly inside a Champions League qualifying spot for next season, sitting third in the Bundesliga, just 1 point off Borussia Dortmund in second. And Ange kept his boys firmly inside that Champions League qualifying spot, backing up a 3-0 home win over Werder Bremen, with a big point on the road at Gladbach thanks to a late Jonathan Burkhardt goal. Heading into an international break, it felt like Ange could put his feet up and relax for the last 8 games of the season, knowing Champions League football was all but confirmed. And that attitude started to rub off on the players as they suffered an embarrassing 2-1 defeat at home to Union Berlin, before not quite keeping up with Bayern Munich in an entertaining 5-goal thriller, losing 3-2, which handed them the Bundesliga title. Ange's boys bounced back with a 3-0 home win over Hoffenheim, before their form again took a turn for the worse, being battered 3-1 by Dortmund in front of the yellow wall, and then dropping points to the Freiburg team Ange defeated in his first game in charge, led into a 2-0 defeat away at Mainz, whose win saw them escape the relegation zone. That set up a big second to last match down the Bundesliga as they hosted Leipzig in a 4th versus 5th clash with only 1 point separating the two teams. Ange knew this was must-win time to make sure his team could book their spot in the Champions League for next season. And thankfully, Ange's men stood up when it counted, Aliuwahi ending a long goal drought by breaking the deadlock in the 55th minute, before with 20 minutes to go, it was Mario Götze who sealed a 2-0 win. A huge 3 points which gave them the 2-point gap over Leipzig, heading into their final day clash with 17th place Hamburg on the brink of relegation. There were some early scares on the final match day though, as Andreas Schellrup missed the penalty only 12 minutes in, before a few minutes later down the other end, some poor set-piece defence led to Hamburg taking a 1-0 lead. Ange's men were in trouble at halftime and it required a big halftime team talk, but thankfully they came out the sheds firing, with Bahoy returning from injury to get Frankfurt level before Mario Götze popped up just like he did against Leipzig to give them a 2-1 win. It was a sense of relief rather than joy on the touchline, as Ange and his boys knew they'd just got away with qualifying for the Champions League next season. Sergei Pinyev was the pick of the players in Ange's first season in charge, only making 12 appearances but having 2 goals and 3 assists with an average rating of 7.07, progressing nicely towards being a first choice player for Ange's second season in charge. Rasmus Christensen was the pick of the players who had been there all season though, picking up an average rating of 7.04 in his 36 games with 3 goals and 5 assists, followed not too far behind by Hugo Larsson with 5 goals and 9 assists, and Robin Koch with an average rating of 6.99 with 2 goals and 4 assists from centre-back. In behind Hugo Larsson with the most assists was Jean-Matteo Bahoya, not bad considering the amount of time he missed with his broken foot, while Nathaniel Brown as well as Christensen also picked up a handful of assists from wingback. Aliuwahi ended the season as a top goal scorer at Eintracht Frankfurt, but it was a disappointing 15-goal tally considering he already 11 at the halfway stage of the season. Andreas Schellrup made an immediate impact, picking up 8 in his 17 starts, while Scheibe and Burkhardt did well in their limited appearances as starters as well, with 6 and 5 goals respectively. At the other end of the scale, it was a poor season for Niels Nkunku, who could only manage a 6.65 average rating in 42 appearances. He's worn by a knee, so might be someone that departs leading into Ange's second season in charge. But it was an even worse season for one of our big signings in Marco Carnesci, not making a single appearances for some reason. Ange preferred Kevin Trapp, despite the fact that he had a poor run in the back half of the season, and we dropped his playtime even further from being a cup goalkeeper to just a general backup in behind Carnesci. But for some reason, Ange didn't listen. Champions League qualification meant that would have a transfer budget of just over 50 million just been going to season 2 at Eintracht Frankfurt, bumped up by some early sales of Jonathan Burkhardt to Lens for 12 million and Jerome Onguene to Augsburg for 2.4. The board were very happy with Ange's work in his first season in charge, taking Eintracht Frankfurt from all the way down in 13th to a Champions League qualifying spot, much higher than the expected top half finish, and despite their early exit from the knockouts of the Champions League, Ange had also kept his board happy in that regard too. And despite a few supporter concerns with the late season form of Wahi, Schellrup and North, Ange also had the supporters on his side as well, with a potential takeover looming over Eintracht Frankfurt heading into season 2. So I think we've done a decent job there of helping out Ange in his first season back in management, bumping up Eintracht Frankfurt from down in 13th when they first started into a Champions League qualifying spot, even though they did leave it a little bit closely late on with those poor results late in the season. We've got Champions League football here at Eintracht Frankfurt next season, and just over £50 million that we can spend to try and improve the squad, which already is looking pretty good, with quite a young promising squad for the most part. In terms of the season preview, we're expected to be up there in 4th these days, so definitely a team that should continue to challenge for European qualification, and hopefully Ange can go a bit deeper as well in the Champions League once we make our way into the league phase format. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the first episode of Rebuilding Ange, something a little bit different here on the channel while we do wait for FM26. If you did, then do remember to go down below, leave a thumbs up on the video, and if you want to keep up with the adventures as we try and rebuild Ange, then do make sure to also hit that subscribe button and turn that notification bell on as well. We'll come back in a few days hopefully and get stuck into season 2, and it should be a good one because, as Ange says,
don't usually win things, I always win things, and we'll see you.